Good morning. We are in Ayin Beis, volume 3, reviewing basically the conclusion of the Hemshech. I'm on the bottom of page 1352. We discussed yesterday, and just to remind everyone that this is now, we're learning on the second time around, but now informed by namely the three Maimorim, the Alter Rebbe and Mittler Rebbe's Maimer Mika Hashem Elokeinu, and now introducing also the Maimer Veinenu Me'ires from the Mittler Rebbe, based on an Alter Rebbe's Maimer, as I explained yesterday. And learning and reviewing it, we're not going to learn every detail, but reviewing the flow all the way till the end of the Hemshech, and then try to piece together, based on these sources and based on what we've discussed, where the final conclusion of the answer to the questions that are left unanswered, and the themes that were left unfinished, and trying to understand how the Rebbe Rashab would have most likely continued the Hemshech had he continued to write it. So, and I'm trying to put it all into the larger context, as I explained yesterday, of interface, Mamayla Mata, Mamat Lamayla, meaning like Torah from the top down, Mamat Lamayla from the bottom up. And each one is necessary. And now we've entered the zone, after explaining the general pieces, of going into Eir Hariyah, vision, or eyesight, and actually using even physical examples of how an eye works, where it needs, though the eye sees, but it needs an outside light to be able to see in the dark. So he's introduced us now to essentially 3 types of Ohr, but the truth is, it's really 4 types. There's the Mashpia, like the sun, or a candle, that he calls an Atzmi, Hameir. There's a Bohir, which means there's a like a luminous stone that does not radiate, does not illuminate the darkness, but it glows even in the darkness. And then there's a state like an eye that even in the dark, it doesn't glow at all. It needs an outside light, and then the eye can see. That's what we've learned. And I explained yesterday, why is it so important to understand all these different levels of Ohr? Because it's all about how we transform ourselves in a dark world where we don't see godliness, to begin to discern and to appreciate godliness. And I gave the example of simple education. Just like a child begins by learning an Aleph, a Beis, and from there our knowledge grows and our awareness grows and our consciousness grows. So essentially the growth of awareness and consciousness and to reach higher levels is essentially bringing light into a dark place. That's what it comes down to, illuminating the darkness of ignorance and all the other darkness that we deal with in this world that we live in. We live in a world that has a lot of falsities. I mean, even today, look at the world, different narratives, complete false information that guides people's lives. They're living in darkness. So worse than darkness, they're living in sheker. So the process of growing, of becoming aware of things, is really like opening our eyes. To use the Rebbe's expression about Mashiach, you also can understand that the Rebbe used to effen the Eigen, to open our eyes. But based on the principles we're learning here, you can appreciate that. So it's not just open your eyes in a figurative sense, it's actually learning to see reality for what it is, to connect the dots, to see the patterns, to see things that are not always visible to the naked eye. And that's the real goal here, ultimately. So therefore, there are stages. So you have the stage of the sunlight, that would be the brightest, that the sun itself is shining, it's a luminary, it's like an Atzmi, a Maor. God gave it that power. Then you have on a lower level, you have the moon, which we'll talk about soon. And you have candlelight, as I said. And then you have a luminous stone. And then you have the eye, which on one hand is a seeing entity, but on the other hand, it needs light and today to be able to see. And ultimately, the goal is that the eye itself should learn to see godliness, as we shall discuss. So this is more or less where we're at. So I reached down to the bottom of the page. We spoke about Tchar v'Nukva in Ohr. There's 2 types. There's Tchar, like a Mashpia, like he compared that to the sun. You also like the candle, the flame, and B'chinas Nukva, that it doesn't have power of its own to shine, illuminate, but when it receives something, then it lights and illuminates. And he gave the example of Mashpia-Mekabel, that the Mekabel has seichel, but he needs the Mashpia to get the seichel, to feed that seichel, to ignite it, so to speak. But once he ignites it, then the Mekabel also can teach and teach others. And when he's not in the presence of his teacher, he teaches others. The farther he is from the teacher, actually, the more he teaches others. So you see from that it has Ohr, but it's an Ohr that needs to be ignited. So here you have exactly the same ideas that we talked about. If you have light on your own, that's a big milah because it means you were given, but that's still a gift from above. When the light comes, someone else illuminates, but you then work on it and it becomes something that you now, Mashpia, that's more on your end. That's the Talmud. So of course a teacher can teach and you have enough Ohr, but we want also an Ohr that the student, that the Mekabel will integrate and be able to teach others. I just gave a shit this morning in the Koach about Shalheva Selam Eleh, this week's chapter. Not just enough to light the candle, that the candle should burn on its own. Maybe you could post it later. Yeah, Yitzchak. So just I thought it was a very powerful class in that sense. So it's very similar to this idea. That's not just enough to receive light. Then you have to also become a source of light. So there's a source, like he says, tchar, and there's nukva. And both are necessary, especially in the context of the interface we've been discussing. And that's where we reached, close to the bottom of page 1352. As I said, my approach going forward is going to be, I'm going to select, I'm not going to read everything, but there will be pieces I will read, because it's, number one, to refresh ourselves, but also to really keep a strong grounding in the actual source. So there'll be sections we'll read, but we'll definitely review the flow of everything. So some of it will be reviewed, some of it will be read. That's more or less a summary of where we're at. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Anybody wants to ask anything?
Sorry, I jumped in. I knew you were going to say that. The Rebbe's Sicha on Parshas Ba'aloscha, he talks about the light, the wick, and the oil, and he has it differently. Not like we've been learning from the Mittel Rebbe. He said that the oil is the guf. And the Rebbe is saying something else. He's saying that the oil is the mitzvahs.
There's different ways it's explained. Even in the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim, I should say, there are different ways it's explained. This is not uncommon in Chassidus. That there are different ways that the candle is explained. Sometimes the wick is the body and the flame is the soul. Here in this Maimer, in Alter Rebbe's Maimer, he says the wick is the nefesh halikis, immersed within the body and the animal soul in the oil. So you have different explanations. Can they be reconciled? Maybe. I didn't really look into that, but it shouldn't be surprising that you'll have different explanations. So if you look in the Maimer, in the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, in the Chanukah itself, there's a few different explanations for that. Okay? Yeah. So let's continue. I'm now at the bottom of page 1352, reviewing, again, with the emphasis, not so much learning the details of each of these pages, but really more how it all develops. So we're middle of now this Koach Hariyah that the Rebbe Rashab wants to explain. And with that, we go back to how a neshama comes down into this dark world and illuminates it with its own flame, Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam, and the flame and candle of mitzvah, and the Torah Ohr, which is the ultimate Ohr, the Ohr Atzmi, as he calls it here. So that's the general thing to keep in mind. But in doing so, he's going to go through many different details. As I also said, he's going to talk in Torah itself. We have all these levels. We're going to learn Mikra, Mishnah, Talmud. That will be a little later. I'll be at the bottom of page 1364. So the next section now that we're going to be learning is primarily a discussion about Mekabel. There's Mashpia, Bchar, the masculine transmission, like the sun, and Mekabel is the light that is received. What that means is that the light is the light that it gives off comes from being ignited by the Mashpia, but it's still a light of the Mekabel itself, like he said with the seichel of the student. It's not the teacher and the students is just a megaphone or a funnel for the teacher. We're not talking about a microphone. The student has his own seichel, but his seichel is now being informed by the ideas that the teacher taught him, and now he then continues to be mashpia. So it's a different way that it gives off light, but it's still called Ohr. Not called Mekabel alone. It's a Ohr HaMekabel. That's a key thing to keep in mind. Because as I said, the goal is making a dira b'tachteinim, not just that we should receive the Ohr from the higher worlds, but that this world itself should give off light. That's the ultimate goal. He's going to elaborate more about this Ohr HaMekabel. And as I said, break it into 3 levels: the moonlight, the luminous stone, and eyesight, vision. But we'll get there shortly. So he says like this now. To give another example of a Ohr Mekabel, where the Ohr is coming from the Mekabel, but it's being triggered by the Mashpia, like we just said about the student and teacher, he's now going to give the example of actually male and female, husband and wife. I'm going to say that's the wife that gives birth, but can only give birth once the seed fertilizes the egg. I'm reading 6 lines from the bottom of page 1352. If you want to follow along, you can, and you don't have the book, the Sefer, you can look at the ayinbeis.com. All these pages are scanned there, PDFs. So he says, so first he said, Mashpia Mekabel, now Tchar v'nukva, male and female. A woman is not just a receptacle, like I said before, a funnel or a channel. She has the power to give birth. God created a woman with the power to give birth. She has all the organs necessary and all the elements to give birth. However, a woman, Shazriya, will conceive and give birth. However, for that to be triggered, the process, she will not give birth on her own without the hashpah of the seed of the dchar, of the male. Another example is the power to vegetation in the earth. So we know the earth, you put a seed on a table, it's not going to grow into anything. You put it in the earth, there's a koach hatzameach. God gave a power to the earth, not to the heavens, and not to other elements. The earth, koach hatzameach. So the primary growth is coming from the koach hatzameach, that's embedded in the earth. But you need to have the kshamim, the rains, to fall, to nurture, and the moisture should get the seeds growing. Okay. So all this comes to demonstrate that it's an Ohr, and it has the power to give off light, to give birth, but there's another force that's needed to so-called trigger it, or to get it going, to stimulate it, to fertilize it. Like the mind of the student. He has a mind, but the teacher is what fertilizes that mind by planting a seed in it, which is like giving it an idea, training the student, etc. Now he goes the Kamei Kain, who belevana. And so too is it with the levana, the moon. The sira lesla megama klum. The Zohar says, a moon on its own does not have anything of its own. Megama means anything. Lesla megama, it has nothing of its own. But yet we see a moon does shine. It doesn't have the same power, firepower, and as the sun, but it shines. So he says, it's not coming from itself. In other words, if there was no sun, the moon would not shine. And nevertheless, it's not just a mirror. Like I said, it's not just a receptacle, a channel for the sun. You can't say it has no light at all. The Torah also calls it in the name of a Maor. It says God created two luminaries. He didn't say created one luminary, the sun, and the moon is just a extension of the sun or a reflection of the sun. There's two Maoris here. So what does it mean that it doesn't have of its own? And on the other hand, it's called a Maor. So he says, Acha Kavona. I'm reading on the top of 1353. When it says it doesn't have a light that extends, an expressive light. It doesn't mean it doesn't have light. It would be like saying the student that's hearing from the teacher an idea, to say that the student has no intelligence, has no brain. Of course he has a brain, but his mind is not yet fertile enough to be able to give off an idea. That's what he needs the teacher to ignite it. So you can't say he has no oir. You could say he doesn't have Mashpia. Everybody calls here hamispashet lahoyer. That's a particular strength that God gave to the sun. That the sun has the power to express light, to transmit light. I should say it's a transmitter. The moon is not a transmitter on its own until something triggers. Even though it's called a luminary, it doesn't have the power to radiate on its own, to illuminate on its own. Only when it will receive from the light of the sun, then the moon will be able to give off light. So it shouldn't be confused. Like I said, a mirror, for example, is not that way. Even though a mirror has a certain element of it, but a mirror is not a Maor. That would be like the sun is bouncing off the mirror and reflecting. Here you're talking about another Maor, but it just works differently. So it's like two different ways that light can be transmitted to us. One on its own, and one it needs something to get it triggered to be able to give off light, or to give off seichel, or to give birth, and so on. Okay. And then the moon will shine with its own light. It's not the sunlight. It has its own light. But light cannot shine without the sun triggering it or generating it, or however you phrase it. But to qualify this, he does add, because sometimes we say that it says v'yesh b'zeh gam eir hashemesh. It doesn't mean that the moon doesn't have anything from the eir hashemesh. It also has eir hashemesh. Let's take the student and the teacher. The student is getting the idea from the teacher. But when the student teaches it, he has two things going on. It's his own mind at work that has been stimulated, but he's also expressing what he's heard from his teacher. It's not a contradiction. However, as the sun enters the moon, even the sun part of it also gets changed from the way it is on its own. So you can't call it sunlight, it's moonlight. So basically he's saying that the moonlight has two elements to it. One, it's its own light that's triggered by the sun, and also it is somewhat also transmitting some sunlight as well. That's what he's saying here. But even though it's not called the sun, because it's nishtana. V'hainu, and this means she b'chinas er Mekabel v'le er Mashpia be'etzem. That's why it's called er Mekabel. So not as many would interpret er Mekabel that it's just receiving light. It's called er Mekabel because it needs to receive something in order to give off light. But don't think it doesn't have light. It has light. It's not er Mashpia be'etzem. Not like the sun that's a Mashpia be'etzem, that it itself does not need a source of light. For the sun doesn't need, besides Hashem creating it that way, but once it's created that way, the sun is a source of light, of illuminating light. Because er Mekabel, it doesn't illuminate on its own. Now, I'll just add a few things that I want to say in the bigger context before I continue, is this. This is not incidental or details here. This is critical. Because on one hand, if someone asked you what's greater, the sun or the moon, so most people would say the sun is greater. It's a mashpia be'etzem, tremendous amount of light. The moon is a moira cotton in proportion. Gives off much less light. But what you're seeing here is that there's something, a mystery that we're going to discuss in the Feminine-Mekabel that the Feminine-Mashpia does not have. In other words, if you look with the naked eye, the sun is more powerful than the moon. But there's something about the moon having a light that's hidden, meaning not a light that expresses itself until something ignites it. What is that light like? That we're going to learn that carries etzem more than the sun does. That's why Malchus is higher than Zah. So Zah is the Mashpia. That's the Shemesh. So talking about Giluyim, Zah is higher, is the Mashpia. But it's like saying the student that Metamide Yesem Makum that does something that the teacher doesn't have. Something we've learned already about transforming even a dark place. So not just that you're bringing light into a dark place, there's something about the concealed state of an Feminine-Mekabel that's going to allow us to access levels that are higher than the Shemesh. So ultimately, going back to the interface theme, both are necessary. The sun, or in this case, Feminine-Mashpia, its role is to illuminate. It's like Torah. Torah tells us what we should be doing. But remember, we learned in the Mitzvah Rebbe's Ma'amer Seif Ma'aseh b'Machshavat Tchila. The kavanah is not just to bring Ohr to the world, is that there's something about the mitzvahs that we do in the lowest of worlds, transforming the very tachtenim, the darkness, that is even deeper than the Torah Ohr. That's why he said, if you recall, he said that the Magbi comes before the Mashpili. So it's true, we want to have that Ohr, and we want to have that Ohr that triggers. But afterwards, once Malchus, once the Levana elevates, once, as we're going to learn, the eyesight can see, it could end up seeing on its own without the light that is the siyua. So it's important to remember that this discussion here is going to be critical in the whole discussion of the interface of that which is above and that which is below. So the Momata Lamaila of Mekabel in some ways has a deeper, reaches deeper in the etzem than the Mamayla Lamata of the Ohr, Mashpia. He doesn't say that here yet, but it's definitely going to be a central theme that we've already learned as well. If you remember, we learned about Einoid, Havai Lakim Einoid, reaching the HaHelem Atzmi. I don't want to go to the HaHelem Atzmi right now because that's a whole other discussion. But I just wanted to point out that what we're learning here is going to come very critical in the whole picture of how everything joins together, both from above and below. Okay. Let me stop here if anybody wants to ask anything before I continue here.
Rabbi Jacobson, can you tell me where I could find the, not on PDF, but this is from the Mittel Rebbe's Maimarim?
What we're learning now?
Yeah, Ve'eneinu Tirena.
1 second. We're learning inside now Ayin Beis.
So I bought the whole Ayin Beis, and now I have it. And I have the
yeah, but I don't know. Do you you probably bought the latest edition, right? 5 volumes?
Yeah. But it says
Okay.
in the latest edition, it says the page numbers of the old edition. But
yeah,
it
but
only
you don't have, the thing is, they didn't print this part is not yet printed in the new edition. Yours ends somewhere in middle. Where's the last page?
Yeah. The last is like 1250.
Right, and we're on 1353 here. So you have till the beginnings of volume 3. That's why I'm saying if those don't have the book, it's on the PDF.
Okay.
If you have the book, you need an earlier edition. I'm looking at an earlier edition that was published in 3 volumes without footnotes. What you have is a later edition with a lot of footnotes, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you
you're
tried to
looking at a
explain that
later
to me.
edition. They have not reached yet. They have not printed this section yet. So the basis of this mimer, of what we're learning now, is based on a mimer of the Mittler Rebbe Ve'eneinu Me'iris, which I posted on the group You
Where
on the
can I
group?
find that, Maimer? Yeah, I'm on the group and I
I-
saw it on the PDF,
It's
but I
there.
also
I
happened.
posted it. I posted it there yesterday.
Where is it in the Sfarim themselves? Where can I find it in the actual
That
Sfarim?
mimer is not printed.
Oh,
I have it, but it's never been printed yet.
okay.
What I posted has not been printed. So you can print it out from your phone or from your computer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Any questions about what we just learned? No. Okay. Okay. So now let me read this parentheses, which is going to be very helpful as well. So he says like this: "V'nimtza mashihi b'chinas moed u'b'chinas atzmi lo b'chinas er." So he's going to explain a little what I just said, but it's in his own words. He says like this: the sun is both a moed and oir, because it's a moed and it's also er mispashet. It's not just a source of light; it's a source of light that actually has the power to transmit light. Ba'ashenkin Levona, he says, Nim says, moed b'chinas atzmi lo b'chinas er. Its state of being, when we call it hamoyer, like the Torah calls it moyer akotten, it's a state, it's a source of light. However, it's not a revealed light. It's a source of light that needs the sun to get it to shine. So it's b'chinas atzmi lo b'chinas er. V'lo kamei hashemes shebeyesu b'chinas moyer haru gamkin b'chinas er. Not like the sun, that while being a source of light, it's also actual light, meaning revealed light. Its job, its mission, its function is to radiate, to illuminate. The sun is not like the moon. The moon does not radiate, illuminate on its own. The sun does. Now the Rebbe Rashab qualifies. But if you look in the pasuk, it says that both ma'oris, both luminaries, are there to illuminate. The it says that God placed these two luminaries in heaven to illuminate. It says it on both of them, not just on the sun. Based on what he just said, the illuminating part is only the sun. Yes, they're both a source of light, but the light of this moon is not a radiating one on its own. V'gam, he's going to explain. We'll read it together. V'gam, Hari Hashemesh b'chinas moyer v'lei b'chinas er. And on the other hand, the Shemesh isn't just a light; it's also a source. So both the Levana and the Shemesh are both moyer. The Shemesh, however, also has an element of lahoyer and oyer. The moon does not have that on its own. We still have to understand why it says lahoyer. We'll get to that in a minute. But the Shemesh is not just oyer; it's also moyer. Umashikosav lahoyer hainu aideha oyer. Ukamashikosav b'mokem acher. So when it says lahoyer, it means that although the shemesh is a moyer, then it's also said that it's a moyer that is to illuminate, so it gives off light. Nevertheless, it's not that in such a concealed state. Now, I think when we learned that, I remember I was troubled also what that means. I think what he means to say that by the sun, the oir part, though the moyer is obviously higher than the oir, but the oir is not concealed. It's radiating. It's just not the level of moyer. So it's not HaHelem called Koach. Whereas by the moon, it is a HaHelem on its own. Let's just read on. Let me just read this again. Sorry.
Hey. Hey.
Excuse me, what are you saying?
Which page is this?
1353. Trying to remember how I explained it then. One second. Okay, I think this is the way what he's saying is like this. The Levana is also called Lahoyer because, as we said, the Feminine-Mekabel is not meant to just remain completely not a non-illuminator. It's just that it illuminates only after it's ignited and triggered by the Mashpia, the sun. So in other words, the pasuk is saying that the moon is also Lahoyer. It's just a different way that it that works. So I don't think he's asking; he's just saying it as a statement to explain that both sun and moon both radiate. They're just different ways they illuminate, but both of them have the element of a Maor but the sun has also. Why we say therefore it has Ohr? Because the Ohr it has because not the HaHelem. The sun's light is meant to express itself on its own. It expands. It's like he said, mispashet. The moon does not do that on its own unless it is triggered by the sun. I think that's what he's essentially saying. Yeah, that the sun also includes in it the power to illuminate. Now, that's sun and moon. Now he's going to say, oh, Lamaila. What is this Lamaila? This is all a Gashmi's example, a physical example. So Lamaila yesh lemer, you can say Shazeo b'chinas Koach hagili v'Koach HaHelem. Yeah, exactly. That this is the difference between the light of the sun, light of the moon. One is Koach hagili, sun is the Koach hagili, the power to reveal, and one is the power to conceal. The Koach hagili gama etzemein b'chinas Helem legamri. So in Koach hagili, like in the sun, also the etzem is not in a completely concealed state, because ultimately the sun does give off sunlight that expresses what the sun is. Yeah, there's the two levels in there. Ma'ala and ketz is HaHelem HaHelem, and there's Gili HaGili. Right. So in the highest level, when we talk about God's capacity, is the capacity to reveal, to illuminate, and the capacity not to illuminate. So therefore, the Levana, in its very essence, even as a concealed state, is a power. It's the power of God not to shine. And then there's the element that comes through the moon, through the sun, that ignites and triggers the moon to also give off some light. So basically, both the sun and the moon are Maor. The sun has also an element of Ohr Gili, Ohr Bespashet. The moon's Lahoyer is only triggered by the sun, and it's a Lahoyer. It tells us about the Koach Le Lahoyer, the power not to illuminate. That's also a power, and it reveals to us God's power, the power not to shine. And we're going to learn more about this as we discuss, as I said earlier, the Etzem and Gili. So Levana has all these qualities. And that's essentially the point that he's making.
So why is it the Levana? If it doesn't have the power to shine, why is it called Maor? The whole thing of Maor is to shine.
No, who said Maor is a Etzem? Maor means it's a source of light. It doesn't mean it has to shine. It could be a source that doesn't shine. That's what he said. Maor means that it doesn't have to shine. Atzmi and when it does shine, it shines. Once the Mashpia, the Ohr Hashem ignites it, then it does give off light of its own, like we learned. That's its role. Its role is not to be a shining, initially a shining entity on its own. As I said, it's meant to show us that we can find Ohr even when it's not there begili. If you only had a shemesh, you wouldn't know. What about people who, for example, you don't see any light in them, but they have a neshama? That's why I said before with the interface, it shows you that you can define the divine in the moon as well. And we're going to soon learn it's even deeper than in the sun. The Yicholte Shaloi L'Hoyer, yeah. The question is why it says L'Hoyer on the moon. So I think he's answering two things. One is L'Hoyer because it reveals to us the lack of revelation, and most importantly that L'Hoyer is after the sun so-called triggers it, like he's going to say now. So even though that's the moon on its own, but after it receives from the light of the sun, Atzma, it gives off light on its own. Even when the sun is not shining and flowing within it, like we said before with the student, that the student can teach others, even the teacher is not present. And on the contrary, as it distances itself from the sun, that's what it'll light more. That's why you see in the middle of the day, the moon doesn't give off any light. But at night, when the sun is not shining, it does give off light. Okay. So again, to go back to my introduction yesterday, this is not just semantics. This is about explaining different ways that we reveal the divine in a concealed state. So it's not just a sun that's shining. We also want to reveal it in the state of Malchus. That's less lemegar malklum. Even in a state where you don't see, there's also a divine Maor over there. And it can also begin to illuminate once the sun is Mashpia Ohr into the Levana. So, as I said, we want the full transformation. That's why a teacher and a student, you don't just want the teacher's intelligence shining through the student. You want it to also get the student going, that his mind, that on its own was not shining, is now beginning to shine as well once the teacher stimulates the idea within him. Or like a woman giving birth, it's with a fertilized egg that comes from the seed, but she's giving birth. Isha kishazriya v'yolda. She's giving birth. It's her birth. Okay. So that covers the moon and the sun. Then the Rebbe Rashab continues. Going to bring the second thing now. Even Teiv. V'hine Even Teiv haboyer harihu meir gamken b'cheshach. Like the moon that shines in the dark once it gets its light, the Even Boyer, the luminous stone, like we see glowing stones, have a certain luminous element to them. It also radiates in the dark. It doesn't radiate, it doesn't illuminate the dark, but you can see it in the dark. You see its glow. Like we find in the Ark of Noach. You should build a tsoyar. There's two opinions. One is a window, and one is Even Teiv. That the Sheitas that they established, they placed Avonim Tevim Margolius, precious stones and jewels that were luminous. To the Rashi Pirish, Yeshem Chalein v'hu Medrash Rabbah. So Rashi brings the other opinion that it's a window, but I don't want to go into that. There he asks a question, l'cheda, a window, but the mazolas didn't shine outside. So where did the light come from? If the mazolas were not, the sun was not shining, how would the window help? That's why there's the second opinion that it was luminous stones, not the sun, not the daylight. That's a separate topic. So I'm skipping that. But Evan who dover me'iri mitzad Atzmi. Now, luminous stone shines on its own. Nothing causes it to shine. And the only reason it shines is because it has a certain ingredient. It has a feature in it It has the ingredients, the element in it that causes it to shine. That means that darkness does not have the power to darken that light within it. The darkness it conceals everything, but not something that has some luminous quality in it, some luminous feature in it. That's why it radiates, it shines. However, this is not like the sun. It's not an Atzmi. So now he's saying that also the stones receive from the Shemesh. The difference is that the stones remain luminous. The moon, well, we'll see if there's a difference. So kiyudua da'avonim tevim u'ma'imirim hem me'pu'ulas hashemesh oya kechovim. So it says in the Svarim that the luminous stones, where it comes from, is from the effect of the sun or the stars. So essentially, the sun and the stars, in some way, are infusing that particular stone. The stone has to have certain ingredients, because you see, not every stone is luminous. So it's not just the sun and the stars, but the sun and the stars is what, in a way, gets that light going. And the air that it receives is that sparks from it, and that's what shines. Because these stones have a certain element of some luminous quality, like schuch is behira, like a shining glass, pane of glass, like a mirror. That's why it receives and absorbs that light. So in other words, there are things in this world, like you could see certain objects, for example, repel sunlight, and some absorb sunlight. That's why you wear, for example, white clothing in the summer, because white does not absorb. Dark clothing absorbs more. So there are different materials that have more absorbing qualities and some that are not that way. These type of stones, these luminous stones, have a quality like that. But so once the sun, so-called, or the stars transmit light, that stone retains an element of something that's luminous.
Even when they are not a reflection of the sun, it stays with them. Let's say the heaven table is inside the house, no sun, no kechovim.
I think some of them, I think some of them retain it always. I think there are others that don't. You know, today you have certain lights that if you put it out in the sun, they shine, but at some point they'll lose their power, and they need they need to be what's the word? Recharged by the sun. So I think there are two types of stones, if I recall looking into it. There are those that retain it all the time. There are luminous stones that are always luminous. They originally got it from the sun. And there are others, I think, that it does fade, and you need to be recharged. I believe that's the case. So he says now this, so what do we see from this? That the luminous stones, that even when they're sparkling and they're radiating, it's not a moyer be'etzem. Canal. And it's not radiating an atzmi like the levana. The levana has actual light within it. It's just not shining until the sun. Here he's saying it does not have it. Where the Talmud has seichel. However, the seichel needs to be triggered by the teacher. Because these stones are a daimon pashut. They're just a plain inanimate stone, like all stones, like all minerals. It's a stone that has a luminous quality to it. So what then causes it to shine? Not because it has an atzmi. The stone itself doesn't have it. It's only because it is absorbing. When nikna means it's like owning, it's integrating from the shemesh. That's what's causing it to shine. Let me just finish 1 second. And because it's the light of the sun or the moon or the stars, that's why darkness does not. That's why it doesn't get darkened, because it has a light within it, but it's not a atzmi. It's not like the stone is a source of light. But it's still not like the light of the sun. But it's not like a reflection of the sun, is because it became nitfus. This light of the sun has so-called become internalized and become integrated into the stone. And that's why its light changes. That's why it gives off light, it shines and glows even when you don't have the Eir HaShemesh, because it has been integrated. It's not like a mirror. A mirror, you take away the sun, there's no more reflection. Here, the stone has internalized it to some extent. And it's when the sun is shining, that's when the stone becomes weaker. It says, because the air becomes integrated within it, one. But it does not shine be'etzem. The moon shines be'etzem because it's a Maor. You don't call a luminous stone a Maor. And yet, it does internalize that light. So it's another level of Mekabel. So far we have the Eir HaShemesh. We have that's the sun. We have the moon. Now we have the luminous stone. And then he's going to say the next paragraph, which we'll learn in the next class tomorrow. The third level of Mekabel. The Riyas Ha'ayin, the vision of the eye. And we'll learn how that context. So you see here again, different levels of integration of light. Is it a source of light? Is it illuminating? Does it stay with it? Does it not? All these are examples and gradations of how much integration happens in the interface between Mashpia and Mekabel, between the light from above and the light below. Because that's the goal, is to transform this world. So you have here many examples. The sun shines, the moon has oil, but it is a Maor, but it does not shine unless there's a sun. And now we have the luminous stone that's not a Maor, but it does shine because it does internalize, and therefore it glows even when the sun is not there. Okay.
What different the Even Trevo from Stam Adoimem? So why Stam Adoimem is not being absorbed the sun? So he said Yesh Boy Behirus. What does it mean?
It has ingredients that are potentially allowed itself to glow. I mean, you see some animals also have it, that when there's a light that shines, it wakes up from a dormant state, a certain element of that. There are properties in different materials and elements that don't glow on their own, but when you shine a light on them, they light up.
Yeah, you have flies, you have fish that are shining.
Right? And some do, some don't. It's just different types of stones. There's just a plain stone that you'll find in your garden is most likely not luminous, but certain stones are. There are luminous stones. I mean, in the aphid,
What does it mean that but the moon is Ohr Atzmo?
So Atzmi, he called it, yeah, because it's a Maor. It means that it has an element of, it's a source of light, but light doesn't always mean revealed light. It's like the Mekabel. Doesn't mean it's revealed light, but it's still a form of light. Like he says, Yecholte Shalei Lahoyer. Even the Koach HaHelem of the Eibush is also a Maor in a way. But he said, he called it Ohr Atzmi Lebe B'chinas Ohr. That's the words he used.
He also said when it is shining, it is the oil shelo, oil atzmo, not oil shemesh.
Correct. Correct. Like the seichel of the Talmud. When it's shining, once the teacher has taught him, so the seichel of the Talmud is the one that's shining and the one that teaches others. Let's stop here at the end of the paragraph on page 1353. Are there any questions? Any other questions? We can understand it all when we understand the nimshal, the moral, as it's relevant to what we're learning here. But meanwhile, that's the story.
Now it makes perfect sense that in La'atid La'avo, that the moon is going to be the same size, it's going to be its own. So meaning that the Mekabel can reach even a higher level than the Mashpia.
That's correct. That's exactly what we're going to learn. Yeah.
Why is it called oil HaMekabel, the moon? If it's a oil,
because it needs the sun for it to shine, to actually shine. It can't shine on its own. The air samish is called air mashpia. We talk about it's called air mekabel from the level of oir, not the level of moir. For the moon to be a moir, it does not need the sun. God created two moirs, but for the moon to shine, it needs the sun. So that's what makes it a mekabel, like a student from a teacher. You gotta. It's a lot of moving details here, moving parts that need to be put together. But essentially, it's two different forms of moir that we're talking about: the Feminine-Mekabel, Feminine-Mekabel, and you have to keep in mind that something can be a moir, like you said, an Atzmi, but it's not an oil. It's not. It doesn't radiate, illuminate on its own. That's the kavanah, that the moon should shine only when the sun, so-called, triggers it, or the sun reflects in it. I mean, in Aveda, it's easier to understand. If we didn't have an Air Mekabel like the moon, we would never have the bittul necessary to listen to our teacher. We'd say, hey, I have my own Air. So the moon has the ability to be a Mekabel, like a Talmud. So on one hand, it has its own seichel, and it has its own moyed ability. But for it to shine, it needs a mashpia to teach it, to educate it. And then it becomes integrated. I mentioned before, Levels of Ohr. I gave a class on this today. It's a combination. It's illuminated, it's lit and ignited by someone else, but then it itself is rising and shining. That's the ultimate Talmud. The Talmud receives from the teacher, but then it's Shalheves Me'eleha, not from the Mashpia. And it's, so you see, it's always a combination. It's of two forces at work. Something giving it the power, but then you have to rise on your own. Aveda b'Koach Atzmi.
it's interesting to know how will we explain that before the chet of the moon's supposed to be like the sun, 12 hours the sun and 12 hours the moon, lehoyer. Then the chiyumat is atzmei.
Exactly. And we learned about it as well earlier, about that whole process. And there's a whole sefer from Rabbi Isaac Homler called Sefer Shnei HaMe'edis, where he talks about this. There's my modim on this at length that talk about it. Yeah.
I also think that we learn, maybe it wasn't Tzadik Daled, maybe in Ayin Beis, that the moon will raise to, could be to a higher level even.
Yeah, we learned that, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, we're going to learn all about this. If you remember in the beginning of volume 3, it talked about, if you remember, 7 levels of Aliyas HaMalchus and Aliyas HaLevana, where the Levana is Mekabel from the Shemesh, then it becomes equal to the Shemesh, and then higher. Remember that at all? We learned 7 levels, and then an 8th level. You go back to the beginning of volume 3, he talks about it here on page 12, 1208 and 1209. I discussed it at length then. Yeah. We're going to talk about this. It's going to be very relevant to this whole discussion because at the end of the day, we all begin as a Mekabel. And we want to grow like Koi Inish Adaita de Rabbe to become the level of Mashpia and even higher. You know? Because that's the point, that the neshama comes down below. It's a Mekabel from Torah, but then it becomes a Mashpia in Torah. Yeah, yeah. It'll be very interesting stuff. A lot of good stuff coming.
Speaking of which, yesterday when I was discussing this thing with a group of women, somebody brought up the idea that in addition to the wick, the flame, and the wax, the candle also needs oxygen. And she thought that maybe oxygen is the environment and the people around us. If you have another idea what oxygen might be, or if you ever heard something else.
Okay, that's interesting. An interesting parallel. Let me think. I have to give it some thought. But that's a very interesting discussion. And in the Mimer, he doesn't really refer to it much. I mean, he doesn't make any reference to that. Ner, he calls the wick, the oil, the fuel, and the fire. I have to think about it. It's possible you could say that. The environment, the community.
Yeah, the support,
No, it's possible. So it's interesting.
That's an example of a Talmud taking what we learn and, bringing it up with their own insights.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, that's possible. Let me give it some thought.
As I remember, in Ayin Beis, we were talking that even there are 4 different components that were created: ash, fire, air, water,
Right.
and earth.
Yeah.
There are only 3 of them works actively involved because air and fire somehow related to each other. You remember this in Ayin Beis?
The air and fire relate to each other? No, I don't remember.
I remember it because it was about the space, the mokim, and the fire, and the earth, and the water, and the fire, and then it start to decrease from 4 components to 3 because fire and air somehow like one component of that.
I don't recall.
I know it's strange, but I remember this very vividly because that how I explained that fire and air.
I didn't say you're wrong. I said I don't recall. That's all.
I see.
If you can find it inside, it would be good. I don't remember it.
One more question, Rabbi. When we're talking about sun and versus moon, if I can see it as a marshal. Sun express godliness and moon express godliness. But what is the difference? Sun is just giving, the God's capacity to give. Moon is not only the capacity of giving, but restraint. And from this point of view, they are very, moon is more complicated than sun. And close to godliness, express godliness more accurate than the sun.
Okay. That's
When we're talking that it's close to the essence, that might be the component. What the difference between sun and the moon? Why its moon is close? Because it expresses more godliness in itself than just giving the light as the sun is doing.
okay. That sounds right to me. That sounds right to me. Yeah. Okay.
That's what
Acceptable.
said that the moon is more complicated. The Rambam is saying it. In Kiddush HaChodesh, we learn that Shemesh Yoda Mevoyoi Veyoreach. I don't remember exactly. So the Rambam said that the Shemesh, there's no so many complications. It's more simple. But Yoreach, there is a lot of ma'akolois, naftulim.
Okay.
What's Ma'akalos and Neftulim? What is Ma'akalos? And the other thing?
A lot of it's not straight. It goes around and complicated.
Like Akmumius. It's like yeah.
It's sort of like women and men.
A men that simple?
Yeah. I don't know.
Okay.
But men have femininity in them too. So
Yeah.
nothing is simple. But in a general way.
The mystique, the feminine mystique, right? Okay, let's stop here. I'm going to stop the recording here. If you may, right? We're on 13.